seen more appropriate study designs being applied to the questions that are being asked, and that's really refreshing to see.
Welcome to EyeCan, a podcast about ophthalmology through a uniquely Canadian lens with Dr. Mona Dagher and myself, Dr. Hadi Sahed.
Bienvenue à EyeCan, un balado sur l'ophtalmologie sous un angle typiquement canadien avec le Dr. Hadi Sahed et moi-même, Dr. Mona Dagher.
Season 4 of the EyeCan podcast is brought to you by Bayer Ophthalmology. We thank them for their support. Nous aimerions remercier Bayer Ophthalmology pour leur support de la 4e saison du balado EyeCan.
We will share our experiences as ophthalmologists today and tackle some of the challenges we face as healthcare providers. Hey there, eye care enthusiasts. It's Mona and
Hadi, back at it again with EyeCan.
You know it, Hadi. Today's episode is going to be a real eye-opener. Pun intended.
Mona, always with the puns. I promise, folks, today's discussion will be just as sharp as Mona's great wit.
Hey, we're here to keep it both informative and entertaining, right?
Absolutely. So whether you're a seasoned ophthalmologist or just as fascinated by eyes as we are, you're in for a treat. Our guest on today's episode is Dr. Sherif El-Defrawy, a prominent Canadian ophthalmologist with extensive experience and numerous accolades in the field. He served as a professor and chair of the Department of Ophthalmology and Vision Sciences at the University of Toronto from 2012 to 2023. Additionally, he was the ophthalmologist-in-chief at the Kensington Eye Institute, an institution affiliated with the University of Toronto. Dr. El-Defrawy completed his PhD in pharmacology at Queen's University and then obtained his medical degree from the University of Calgary. He undertook his internship at the University of Toronto and his residency in ophthalmology at the University of Ottawa. In 1995, he then joined the University of Ottawa Eye Institute, eventually becoming the Residency Program Director there from 1999 to 2004. He then chaired the Department of Ophthalmology at Queen's from 2004 to 2012.
Throughout his career, Dr. El-Defrawy has been recognized for his contributions to medical education and research. He has received several teaching awards, including the Professional Association of Interns and Residents of Ontario's Excellence in Clinical Teaching Award, twice. He has also been instrumental in global health initiatives, leading missions to countries such as Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, and the Caribbean, to perform eye surgeries and train local surgeons. Dr. El-Defrawy has held various leadership positions, including serving as the president of the Canadian Ophthalmological Society and the Association of Canadian University Professors of Ophthalmology. He has also been involved in several Ontario expert panels and vision task forces. Dr. El-Defrawy, it's a true honor and a privilege to have you with us tonight. Welcome to the EyeCan podcast.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a real honor to be here as well. Thank you for having me.
Sherif, your path is the ultimate academic ophthalmology leadership path. President of the COS, chair of multiple departments, Residency Program Director. As I have gotten to know you and reading your bio, I'm wondering what your journey was in the beginning, even before going into ophthalmology, deciding about ophthalmology, how you went through that part of your journey, and how clear was it that you would end up having this path in academic ophthalmology, and when that moment happened, if it was an aha moment or if it was more organic over time that these leadership opportunities came your way?
Thank you for the question, Hadi. And it's always interesting the circuitous route we take. After I did my undergrad, which was at Queen's in Kingston, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I did my undergrad in biology, and I'd done a pharmacology course. And my supervisor at the time asked me, what are you doing next year? And I said, I have no idea. This would have been in April of my graduating year. And he said, why don't you come and do some grad work with me? I said, sure. I think it paid like $6,000 a year. So it was great. It was better than zero that I was planning to make. And so I started my research in pharmacology, and it was looking at Alzheimer's disease, which was very timely. And it was a project on how we can create an animal model of Alzheimer's disease, and then how can we enhance the cholinergic system, which tends to be significantly affected in the disease, using pharmacotherapeutics. And so I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the neurological aspects and getting to know the neurophysiology and the anatomy. And so as I slowly finished my PhD, I applied to medicine and got in, and always thought that I would end up doing neurology because I really enjoyed everything, the research. And in the initial part of my medical training, I found the neuroanatomy and neurophysiology just very intellectually stimulating. But when I finally got into the clinical work, it was a big letdown. You could explain the human condition, and especially back then, 35 years ago, there was very little therapeutics you could do. And so I spent a month on neurology, and the last week of that month was with a neurologist who was a neuro-ophthalmologist. It was actually Bill Fletcher in Calgary. And I was just blown away by ophthalmology. First thing, I couldn't believe the amount of the brain that was dedicated to the visual system. And so again, you had all the intellectual excitement of neurology, but then I discovered all these therapeutics that were happening in ophthalmology. The great surgery, lasers were getting into things. And so it was that was the aha moment for me. And so I knew that was going to be it was going to be ophthalmology. And so I pursued ophthalmology after that. And again, it's interesting, as I went through my residency, I really, it was an interesting time. It was a time where predominantly you had, it was rare to have full-time faculty in academic departments at the time. You tended to have primarily part-time faculty. People would come in for a half-day clinic once a week or once every 2 weeks. The residents tended to be in the hospital with very few staff present in the hospital. A lot of the staff didn't show up for their clinics, and you were really on your own. And just at that point, there was a transition happening in academic ophthalmology, where there was a move to try to get full-time faculty, to get universities and university hospitals to commit to an academic ophthalmology program, and to try to really push the education and the research in the program. And that created a lot of town gown conflict that still exists today. And I remember living through this transition and thinking, oh, this is just way too much politics. I don't want any of that. So when I finished my residency, at that time, my chair said, what we need is a glaucoma specialist or a uveitis specialist. And I found all of ophthalmology thrilling. I couldn't see doing one subspecialty. And I thought, you know what, I want to try being a real comprehensive ophthalmology outside academia. And so I said, I'm going to go into private practice in a community setting. And I did. And so my first couple of years were actually not in academia, but in a private setting in Guelph, Ontario. And I had a fabulous time. But at the time, just before, and again, it shows you how naive we were back then. I had a very dear friend in Guelph who was an ophthalmologist there. And he said, why don't you come and join me in practice? And I said, okay. And that was about all the thought that went into it. And I didn't think about how we were going to run our practice. I didn't think about any kind of commitment from the hospital for OR time or anything. And just before I got there, the hospital instituted a block booking system. Before then, you just took a day whenever you needed a day to complete your cases. And so when they instituted the block booking system, all the available blocks of OR time went to the surgeons that were there. And my partner said, well, wait a minute, I'm bringing a new partner into town. And he said, well, that's too bad. That's, he's not here yet. And all the time goes to the surgeon. So it was tough to get some OR time initially. And when I did leave, I found I really missed, I went into a little bit of academic withdrawal. I really missed the discussion with colleagues. I missed the journal clubs. I missed the rounds. And so when an opportunity, Bruce Jackson, who was the chair in Ottawa at the time, said that there would be an opportunity for an academic comprehensive ophthalmologist. And that was a very new idea in academic departments. I jumped at that opportunity and went back to Ottawa. Of course, my parents were there as well, and we had two little ones, so it was ideal for that as well. And that's how I started in academic ophthalmology.
I'm so happy our listeners can hear this, because I don't think any of the trainees kind of graduating and considering their options would have guessed that somebody with your path started out in private practice and then came back to academia. So it's so nice to hear that, because I think many of our trainees feel like they need to have clarity on what their career is going to look like during residency, and it's so nice to know that you can pivot and ultimately to follow your heart and follow your interest, even if that's not your initial inkling. So that was great. And going back to your expectations of yourself from an academic ophthalmology path. So you made that decision to go back into academic ophthalmology, but was it clear to you that you wanted to follow a leadership path, or did that come later?
I think it came later, Hedy. I think during my residency, again, it was a time of change as we developed more comprehensive academic departments in-house. And I did enjoy my time as chief resident, kind of trying to bring the residency or the resident group together and motivating them and getting them on board. And so I knew I liked that aspect of working with a team. And when I got to the academic department, I continued on with the residents. I always enjoyed education. Up till now, I love the interactions with the residents. They keep educating me. And they're always fun to be with. And it gives a whole other purpose to what we do. And so I was drawn to teaching and being involved with the residents, hearing their issues and acting as a liaison between the program director and other departmental leadership. And so it was kind of a natural role for me to slip into a program director position as well. And I enjoyed the putting together grand rounds and the current topics of the day. And it so happened that the CPD director for COS at the time was Bill Clark, and he was running the annual meeting and everything else. And he saw this my tendency to do this, and it was him who said, would you consider coming on to the COS board? And so it was another one of these fortuitous. It wasn't something I had planned, but the opportunity presented, and I said yes. And then my wife said, "You did what?" So at that point, we had three, and so of course time becomes your most limiting factor. But I really enjoyed the COS board, and I really enjoyed the program directorship. And so I started seeing that my contribution would be maybe administration and leadership and teaching. I was always interested in research. It's very hard to do it all. And the research didn't come as naturally as the other thing. So I was happy that I found a few strengths that came naturally that I could do, as well as keep up with the clinical and surgical work. And so at that point, I'd done the I was doing a program director, and I was quite involved with the COS. And again, there was issues that were happening at the time, and the chair in Kingston had opened up, and I knew I'd known Sanjay Sharma well, who was there. I'd known Martin Tenhove a little bit, and he was there as well. Both were just young ophthalmologists getting started. We talked about the position. It seemed like a really exciting move, and we knew both. My wife and I had trained in Kingston, so we knew the city and thought it would be a fun thing to do, and so I took on the chair there. And of course, all these leadership positions, they're a lot of fun. And there's such a sense of accomplishment, but boy, there's a lot of stress. As you guys know, you both know the effort and the work and the stress it takes to manage these positions, and then your busy clinical work and your family, and it's a real juggling act. And sometimes you take on these positions and you go, "Why did I do that? What have I done with all these positions?" But overall, it's so rewarding. To see the departments move forward and grow and produce, really good ophthalmologists from the training program, and produce really good research from the researchers in the department. And so that's what took me to Kingston, and then to Toronto after that. I was just finishing my second term in Kingston, and usually it's a hard 2-term for most chairs. It's a 10-year limit. I think that's such a great rule. It used to be that you had a chair that would be in there for life, for 20 or 30 years. And I think we all tend to stagnate with time, and ideas get stale, and you start losing that excitement to drive the department forward. I wish it happened more for hospital chiefs. You don't see that hard 10-year as strictly enforced for hospital chiefs, but you definitely do in academic department chairs. And so I was coming to the end of my tenure for my second term at Queen's, and University of Toronto position popped up, and I'd known Jeff Hurwitz quite well, and so Jeff and I had talked a fair bit, and that's when I threw my name in. And Hadi, I still remember, I forget which glaucoma specialist said, it's very important for a glaucoma specialist to shift towns every 7 years, because you need to get rid of all those glaucoma patients that have been hanging around your neck for that long. In some ways, it's not a bad idea for a department chair as well, if they're going to go on to a career in leadership.
12 years into my practice, I'm definitely living, my own long-term complications. So, but I think it makes you a better surgeon. So I'm choosing sticking around and learning from my own issues and evolving that way. But what I love about your journey, and I've heard this from a few leaders, is when the leadership opportunities happen more organically, based on the person's interests and tendencies, rather than kind of a search for the title. And so I love hearing that, and I hope our younger listeners are inspired by that. Based on your interests, these leadership opportunities can come. You don't have to have like a specific dream to become a chair or a president of this or that, but to just follow your interests, and those opportunities follow many times.
So true.
EyeCan wants to know what you think. Please send your comments on today's episode or any suggestions you may have for topics or features to communications@cos-sco.ca, and we will try to incorporate them into future episodes.
I'm Ravi Dukaran, and I listen to the EyeCan podcast.
You mentioned research, and I wanted to pivot a little bit to research. And For you to have been in academic ophthalmology for some time now, I'm wondering if you've noticed any major shifts or, trends in research. So whether it's new areas of research or new ways research is done today compared to when you started, I'd love to hear your perceptions about what's exciting with regards to the way research has changed compared to when you started in academic ophthalmology.
Yes, no, I think there's been some really exciting changes in ophthalmic research. I think there continues to be a move away from case reports and retrospective studies, which were kind of the status quo when I started. And of course, sometimes a retrospective study is the most appropriate study. So I think the thing that has happened is you've seen more appropriate study designs being applied to the questions that are being asked, and that's really refreshing to see. And of course, you're seeing many more RCTs happening, which is very exciting for us, and prospective studies happening, which is changing the way we look at problems and how we do things. Big data has been playing a bigger and bigger role, and has been great in highlighting trends and correlations. And when I look at people like Matt Schlenker here in Toronto, Rob Campbell, and in Kingston, using these big data sets and ISIS data, it's really nice to see how they can answer questions and look at these trends that are happening in ophthalmology. Of course, it's really exciting to see some of the cell replacement therapy ideas that are coming out, and I'm sure we're going to see some big advancements in the next few years with stem cells and replacement cells from diseases, everything from, retinal disease, ganglion cells in glaucoma, endothelial cells in corneal diseases. We're already seeing gene replacement therapies, and that's very exciting. And now gene editing therapies are coming out, and that's very exciting as well. The gene replacement that we're seeing has been done mostly by vitrectomies and subretinal placement. But now there's ideas about injection into the suprachoroidal space. You're seeing a whole new level of therapeutic research, and exciting ideas come to life. Complement inhibition for dry macular degeneration. Of course, all the anti-VEGF research that has happened over the last 10, 15 years. It continues to develop and is developing in line with some of the gene therapy that is being developed. So it's been a tremendous amount of change in ophthalmic research over my career. Just starting from case reports to being at the cutting edge of all types of research. And of course, when you look at Université de Montréal, Vancouver, Toronto, the clinician scientists and the basic researchers and the discovery research that's happening, you didn't see that. We didn't have these liaisons. We didn't push these kind of researchers 30 years ago. So it's really wonderful to see.
Truly is an exciting time to be in academic ophthalmology, and also the research, the teaching, the clinical aspect of an academic center is very rewarding. But there are also some challenges, and Sherif, you have a lot of experience. Can you talk to us about the biggest challenges that face academic ophthalmologists?
Sure. Thanks, Mona. That's a great question, and I do worry about some of the challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges has been supporting the full-time academic ophthalmologists at hospitals. I mentioned that definitely 30 to 40 years ago, there was this move to bring together academic ophthalmologists into full-time units at university hospitals and university centers to really dedicate themselves to the triad of academic deliverables, namely teaching, research, and their clinical and surgical work. Because individuals were there in the hospital all the time, you had an oversight and a mentoring of residents and trainees in the clinic all the time. And there was this mentoring with emergencies that happened, with research that happened. I worry that as resources dwindle, you're seeing hospitals cut back on the spending for ophthalmology and really question whether there's a real need for ophthalmology to be at the hospital or with the medical school. And with that reduction in resources comes a reduction in our ability to be able to recruit GFTs and keep GFTs or academic full-time individuals. And if we are unable to retain the complement that we need to retain, I worry that many of the young ophthalmologists won't consider an academic career, but will look to private practice. And I think that will really hurt teaching, and I think it's going to hurt research as well. And then, of course, the other thing is that it's very hard, and it's becoming harder and harder to support those that do research in our academic departments. We have research chairs, but these are getting harder and harder to secure. Our funding is drying up, and it's really dependent on our fundraising to find support for our full-time researchers or clinician scientists. There's really no salary support from grants. And so all these things make it look like it's getting tougher and tougher to do the academic work that we need to do.
Indeed, it is a challenge. And it's also another aspect is balancing it all, the research, the clinical work, the academic work. What are your suggestions and what are your recommendations for people who love to do academics? How have you balanced all of that aspect plus the leadership aspect as well?
Well, that's a great question, and I always say that balance. People presume that balance means that things should be 50-50 or equal. That's not necessarily what balance means. I think balance means whatever ratio is right for your life. I think we all quickly realize that time is our most critical commodity. And we hear this all the time from many people, and how you spend your time really defines you or defines us. And so I think you have to realize what that ratio is for yourself. And then how do you want to spend that time doing that part of your life? So if you want to be a good teacher, I think you have to spend time with trainees. You have to do the teaching. You have to be there to support them. You have to be there to mentor them. And it's really time that's the most important aspect. You can't be a good teacher giving your trainees 45 minutes a week. It really takes time. Same with being a good researcher. You really have to put in the time to write the grants, to read the papers, to prepare your research, to get into the lab or crunch the numbers. And that often means maybe less clinical and surgical work. It might mean a little bit less time at home, and it might even mean a little bit lower income than your colleague in the community who isn't doing any of these things and is doing pure surgical and clinical work. So I think the most important thing is to work out with the people you love and who are dear to you, how much time you're able to be with them and how much time you're able to be at work. And then at work, how much time do you want to dedicate to those things that you enjoy most? It's a tough thing. And I wish I could say I had balance. I think in the last couple of years, I might have had a bit of balance. I have great balance now that I've partially retired.
Shiv, I think what we all need is just some AI algorithm where you can, input what your priorities are, what ratios you want for different aspects of your life, and just ask the, AI algorithm to tell you what to do. There's this whole trend of time boxing, and so I think
True.
I think it'll be great. And then just to kind of force one thing off and have you turn on to the next, no matter what, because sometimes you can just get into this rabbit hole of focusing on one task that ends up taking away from your other priorities. So anyway, I'm really hopeful that we'll have that as an option in the coming years. We haven't talked about industry yet, and we know that industry plays a role in our CPD and our departments and our residency trainings, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are about the role for collaboration between academia and industry in current day ophthalmology.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good question. Now, for many years at U of T, I actually chaired the Relations with Industry committee for the medical school. But I'd be a hypocrite if I said that we could do this without industry, especially in Canada. We are really dependent on industry to do a lot of things that we do in academia, and I'm very thankful for industry to be there. I got to say, as department chair, I really counted on unrestricted educational grants from industry in order to be able to do many of our educational endeavors, many of our research endeavors. Being COS president and executive, how dependent we are on our industry relations in order to be able to run our annual meetings. And I believe that this is a really good and symbiotic relationship. Of course, they would not be helping us in this fashion if they didn't benefit themselves. And I think we both recognize that we benefit very positively, and we have this good relationship. I think the key thing is not to forget that business is the key factor for our industry partners. And so you can't forget that the bottom line for industry is profit, is to make money. And so we have to ensure that we have the appropriate boundaries in place so that we are not affected, we're not inappropriately influenced, and we are not pushed in directions because of our relationships with industry. And that's why I really enjoyed playing a role on our Relations with Industry committee in delineating how do we forge these interactions and what is the proper relationships with industry. And more, we're seeing medical schools and physicians recognize these boundaries. And more, we're seeing industry recognize these boundaries and saying that, we need to create this sort of process in order to be transparent, and in order to show that we're not trying to influence you or direct you or peddle our wares, but we're looking for a common symbiotic positive reinforcement. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And it's an important relationship.
Moving on to another kind of industry, which is the privatization of ophthalmology and seeing those trends within our field. What have your observations been about the privatization of ophthalmology and how that might impact funding and resource allocations for the work being done in academic ophthalmology?
That's another topic that's very close to my heart. Many people will say, there's nothing wrong with privatization, and we've always had private practice all through the years. But I don't consider a 1, 2, or 5 in ophthalmologist private practice in the same vein as I consider these new large private organizations. Most of the private practices that we've seen in the past actually function more like non-for-profit organizations. In fact, the ophthalmologist would often end up spending 30 to 50% of their billings on running that private practice, and it was really just maintaining that level for them to work in. What we're seeing now are these big organizations that have created a facility where the chief goal is maximizing profit and getting a return on investment to any investors in this private practice or to any owners in the private practice. And very often you'll see 2 or 3 or 4 physician owners that are benefiting from this.
Titler used by John Allaire from Allaire Strategical.
EyeCan is available on Apple, Spotify, and Google platforms, and of course through the COS Practice User Center.
Some episodes this season will include relevant links and show notes, so be sure to check episode descriptions to learn more.
The worry here
Thank you for joining us this week. We look forward to bringing you more episodes.
Try to maximize your return on investment. There is a mindset to try to minimize costs and minimize the items that will drive up costs. So there's a move to less complex cases. You might see surgical centers not having the devices or instruments that you need, and asking for the more complex cases that require these devices or instruments to go to the hospital. You see more premium upsells per patient. And there is always the worry that there's an abandonment of emergency call and inpatient work. On the flip side, I on the whole, in hospitals and non-for-profits, there tends to be a fairness in distributing the operating room time. It tends to go between all existing surgeons. New surgeons will get time, and we've always fought to try to get new surgeons the appropriate time. And these centers will take into account factors such as teaching, equity, quality, et cetera. In contrast, the risk with private centers is that you could have a situation where you only want to hire a few select surgeons who are the fastest surgeons, who are the surgeons that upsell the most lenses, and we'll see OR time allocated based on surgical speed, revenue generation, and upselling. I think when you have physician owners, there is still a lot of quality maintenance that happens. My worry is these successful big private centers are being looked at by private equity. In the last 10 years in the US, $1 trillion has been spent by private equity on buying hospitals and private practices. That's $1 trillion. And private equity, the mindset is to purchase something, maximize its profit for 10 years, and then resell it at a profit. And I don't think that's where healthcare should be at all. And already we're seeing from the US, and which is really refreshing to see, we're seeing data to show that patient care is being compromised, that education is being compromised, that research is being compromised. And this is all not a good thing for healthcare. And I worry that what is happening south of the border now, we're at risk to have happen north of the border in a few years' time. And of course, the other worrisome thing, and the thing that's always frustrated me, is that we've had some excellent provincial and national reviews of healthcare systems with multiple great ideas about how we can rejuvenate our healthcare to make it stronger and functional. We know that we have an ailing healthcare that's not working the way it should be. But unfortunately, our political system is such that you need short-term gains, and no one's willing to take those big steps and allow some of these ideas to flourish and give them an opportunity. We really need a national think tank that says we're going to look at how healthcare in Canada needs to be fixed, and we're going to ensure that it gets implemented in all the provinces. Until that happens, we're seeing band-aid solutions like what's happening in Ontario now, where our government is funding private center cataract surgery at a fee that's double the fee they're paying to hospitals. And we don't even have good metrics to know what the output of these centers are. So there's many issues with this. And I don't think that privatization is going to be the solution. And I think it's going to create a lot more problems.
Sherif, you share a lot of wisdom. You have great insight and a great judgment. And I'm sure you've been a great mentor for many, many residents and medical students that have passed along the way under your leadership. How important is mentorship? And what is your advice to young ophthalmologists and residents and fellows that come into our clinics and OR? You seem to have so much to share, and you're so genuine and authentic, and it's really wonderful to hear you speak. And I just would like to know, how much do you value mentorship, and what is your advice to the young ones?
Well, thank you very much, Mona. That is an excellent question, and you know, I think about mentoring a lot and what it means, and I guess, you know, it really is those with more experience or more seniority or more understanding or more knowledge about something, advising those that are newer or more junior in that situation. And maybe it's not just advising. I think it's also motivating, it's encouraging, it's educating, it's supporting, and it's training those individuals to do that task. And to do all those things, I think there has to be a trust, I guess, and a sense of friendship. I think there has to be an honesty and a relationship that develops between a mentor and a mentee. And I think always a friendship develops. And these are wonderful friendships that we've all of us have had and shared and cherished. And I really think we all need to be mentors, and we all need to be mentees as well. I think it's very important for us to have mentors at any age, because at every stage in life and every stage in career, it's all new to us. And yet there are others close to us who have passed through it and dealt with some of the issues and recognized the issues. And I think it enhances, you know, both individuals' understanding and performance. I think it enhances our own enjoyment of life. I think it enhances the care that we can provide our patients, our ability to teach, our ability to make discoveries and do research. I think it certainly makes a junior member's path maybe a bit easier. At least it'll be a bit more enjoyable, and it allows us to pay, you know, good things forward. and it builds camaraderie and it builds friendships. And I'm always amazed at how when you have a certain threshold of mentoring, you change the whole culture of the unit that you're in, and it ends up being a very positive culture. So I think it's a great thing to promote, and it's just a lot of fun, and you make great friendships from it.
That's wonderful, and I know that I would love to have you as a mentor. Having gone through all these steps in your career, it's really impressive to see the growth, the leadership, the exceptional work that you have done. And as you know, the medical field is changing, the teaching is changing, the Royal College imposes a lot of new ways of evaluating students and residents. There's been so much change, especially in residency programs compared to many years ago. I've been in the field for almost 20 years, and I have seen the residency programs change and develop over time. And the Royal College every couple of years comes up with a new trend. So what are the emerging trends in ophthalmic education, and how do you think academic programs are going to cope and adapt to these changes? You've seen it over the years. How do you feel it's going to affect us? Is it change for the positive? Is it just new ways of imposing evaluation forms? Sometimes you see it as a positive, but at times also you see it as something that hinders the progress that we are making.
Right. No, that's an excellent question, and I question the same things as you do, Mona. Sometimes I wonder, is this change for just change's sakes, and to make an entity, give an entity a raison d'etre, or is this really a beneficial change? I think one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of decades, and I am truly impressed with it, is that I think our Royal College sets a certain minimal bar, and we kind of know that if you're able to train residents to that minimal bar, and our Royal College accepts it, I know how good even the worst ophthalmologists that we put out is, and it's a really good bar. The interesting thing is, if you look at the developing world in some countries where you don't have any kind of minimal threshold, you see the two extremes. You see some fantastic physicians and surgeons; they're truly exceptional, and then you see some terrible physicians, and you can't believe what has been said or diagnosed and done. And I really think it's because of this standardization that is lacking in these places. So I think we're very fortunate to have the Royal College and our input into the Royal College Committee, and we've always had a very a wonderful ophthalmology specialty committee at the Royal College, with some very dedicated people playing important roles. Lauren Ballin, to name one of many who have led that committee in the past, and where we say that, you've got to, here's the knowledge, the minimal knowledge you need in every little area of ophthalmology. You have got to have all those, and your training program needs to assure that every one of your residents has that. And I think that's a wonderful thing, and a very important quality control for our surgeons. I do know that, and I'm sure both you and Hattie have the same issues, that it's sometimes hard to get the physician oversight that you need. It's sometimes hard to get the person overseeing a clinic to really be there until the last patient is seen, to really give feedback to the residents, to try to assess each resident in an appropriate way. And that's been one of our struggles in academia to get that sort of appropriate feedback. So that's a variability that I think the college now is trying to deal with CBD. So with CBD, you're trying to see a standardization on a very short time scale every day. Did you pay attention to these tasks that the resident should have been able to do? And did you evaluate them? And did you feed back to the resident? And do you know where they should be going the next day? And I think it's a good idea in theory. It is a daunting task to do on a daily basis. And it will be interesting to see how successful it is, because it's always interesting whenever you try to create new ways of evaluations. You see all these new perverse incentives to go in different directions that can take you away from what you're hoping to do. And so in theory, I think we're seeing a move that will try to enhance our education and, more importantly, our evaluations. And if it doesn't work, I think we'll know soon enough. I certainly hear of all the headaches that have happened with it. Maybe it's because it's still in its early stages, and maybe it'll be refined, and maybe people will come up with a better method going forward.
I'm optimistic, and I really connect with your early comments to the question, your early answers, because I think we still have so much to be proud of in Canada. Our residency grads are recognized worldwide as well trained, with knowledge and surgical skill set, and being in the fellowship director world. I know that anybody who gets a Canadian grad applicant, is always excited about, how well they perform during fellowship. And so I think our standards are really quite good throughout the country. And we're graduating competent, skilled ophthalmologists. So I'm optimistic that CBD will help. And as you said, if it doesn't, we'll know soon enough. Sherif, the next question I have, you've touched on a little bit, but I think I'm wanting to kind of double click on it a little bit and get more comments. It's regarding the definition of academic ophthalmology, and also a little bit about the privatization of ophthalmology. Because what I've seen is a trend toward kind of a varying definition for academic ophthalmology throughout North America. We're seeing excellent programs that are not part of traditional academic centers, are not part of university centers, that are taking on some of the roles of academic ophthalmology. So I can think of, big centers in the US that are taking on the role of research, taking on the role of fellowship education. And so those are some of the roles of academic ophthalmology, but these are not university centers. And so I'm wondering if you feel like there is a definition for what academic ophthalmology is. And if there is a definition, is it necessary to hold on to that definition? And how do you feel about these non-traditional academic centers that are playing some of the roles of academic ophthalmology?
Yeah, another great question, Hattie. And I think it goes back to the same discussion we were having about standardization and setting certain minimal bars, and how that produces excellence, as you say. The worry about having non-traditional centers in doing the teaching is that you will have the same situation as we talked about, in that you will have certain centers that do an absolutely marvelous job of training their trainees, whether they be fellows or residents or medical students. And they might do a much better job than what we call the traditional academic centers. You can have very dedicated individuals, and you often have several people driving the leadership and setting a curriculum that is, superb, bar none. And then you'll have other centers where the trainees are effectively apprentices. And they're doing unsupervised clinics, seeing primarily the same thing over and over again to get through the patient load. You have supervisors that are not present in the clinics, that don't review the patients, or will sit down with the trainee once a week or once every 2 weeks and say, okay, let's talk about the interesting patients. And you don't, without that level of supervision and guidance, you don't have the same education. So it really comes down to standardization. Can it be done in a non-traditional fashion? I think it absolutely can. The only thing is that the oversight becomes very difficult. And so, for example, we all go through a Royal College review every 7 years. Every 7 years might even be too long, but you know how daunting those reviews are, and you know how much we prepare for them. And it is actually the process of preparing for those reviews that often continue to keep our programs in tip-top shape. I know, for example, at the University of Toronto, we had the reviews every 7 years, as we all do. And University of Toronto starts 3 years before the review doing their own internal review to make sure that we get through the review. So really, we're getting reviewed every 3 years to make sure that all our processes are up to par, that we have evidence of supports for our trainees, that our trainees are coping well, that they're learning the things that they're supposed to learn, that they're able to feed back and talk about the issues they have. And we're all recognizing the issues. I mean, we've had issues of trainees being very unhappy about the way they've been treated by their supervisors, and we continue to take actions. Will those opportunities be available to trainees in multiple small private centers? And who will be doing the oversight, and who will be listening to these trainees if they have issues? As you know, a supervisor is effectively a god to a fellow or a resident. They could make or break that resident. And we've seen this. I'm sure both of you have seen this, where all it takes is a couple of bad words or a bad sentence, and that fellow will not get the job that they've applied for. And so they're terrified to even say one negative comment about the fellowship. And so how do you create the checks and balances when you have one or two fellowship supervisors in a private center? I'm not sure. And I think if you can solve that, then it can certainly work. If you can't, I think then you have to leave the training of residents and fellows to the academic centers that have proper checks and balances. And if you're in a private center, get on with the work that you want to do at that private center.
That's interesting insight, and that oversight and the ability for trainees to share feedback openly is useful. So in glaucoma, there's the AUPO certifies fellowships, and it's the oversight they provide is nowhere near the depth that the Royal College provides in residency program reviews. But there is a process, and so I think that could be a starting point to maybe have more in-depth reviews and opportunities for feedback as well, to allow some of these centers to continue to train fellows, when they're providing good training. So that was really interesting insight. As we wrap up this fantastic conversation, I'm hoping that you can share with us your thoughts about the future of ophthalmology in academia, Hopefully some of it will be inspiring and optimistic. But really, what are your predictions about what academic ophthalmology could face in the next 5 or 10 years?
Oh, it's so hard to predict, Hattie. It'll be a very interesting time. I do sometimes worry about the future of academic ophthalmology when I look at again, the whole milieu is changing. We're seeing hospitals not having the resources to support ophthalmic surgery, and the tendency to move these surgeries out of hospital. More often than not, they're going into private centers. And we talked about some of the issues with the private centers. The cataract surgery is really the backbone of the surgical training program for residents. And very often, the education that the residents received was because surgeons knew to be at that hospital, they had to do a certain amount of training. That impetus isn't quite there with private centers. And so as you lose the impetus to train residents, and actually having a resident training costs more and it takes more time per case, I worry as these cases go out to private centers, you'll have less and less attention to education. And I do see some centers struggling with this issue now. The other thing is that you're seeing more and more tendency for people to, even in academic hospitals, to say, well, I'm going to go out and open my own private centers. And as the academic department becomes fragmented, again, you lose the ability to teach properly. You lose the ability to have oversight. You could send your resident, to this center for one day of medical retina, and then to this center for one day of glaucoma. But you really don't know what they're learning, and you don't have any way to get the oversight. So I really hope that over the next decade, we can come up with solutions to strengthen our academic programs again, ensure that they're able to fulfill their mandate of training the residents and fellows. It doesn't mean that the residents and fellows can't go be trained in private centers, but that the crux of the training happens at these academic centers, and that there is enough support for these centers to run that mission. And I think part of that will also be the ability of the provinces to start coming up with some viable long-term solutions to our Canadian healthcare, because there are problems and we've got to get those solutions in place.
Thank you, Sherif, for sharing that with us. It's been a wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot. I'd love to ask a lot more questions, but we're limited in time. And as we end each EyeCan podcast, we'd like to know more about our guest. So would you mind sharing with us what you do outside your professional life? Any activities, any books, podcasts, anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I listen to EyeCan. Is that... In the last 10 years, I've kind of gotten into some triathlons. When I first came to Toronto, I did a triathlon because a lot of the people in the department were doing it. It was a volunteer fundraiser. And I really enjoyed it. And I've been doing more and more cycling and swimming and running. And just last weekend, I convinced our kids and two of their significant others to do a short triathlon with me in Niagara, and it was great fun. So I do that, and I play guitar, and so I'm getting back to guitar. I don't think I'm any better than I was when I was 16, but that's my goal over the next 2 years, to get a bit better. And I paint, and so it's been an opportunity to spend more time doing that. And one of the people that when I was at Queen's, Martin Tenhove, who was the chair there and a neuro-ophthalmologist there. Martin is an amazing sailor. He was an Olympic sailor, and he took me out doing some big boat sailing in the Caribbean a couple of times, and I fell in love with that. And so Laurel and I, my spouse and I, you can actually do this. You can charter one of the big boats, and you got to charter a catamaran if you're not a sailor. Now, real sailors will tell you that's not a real boat. You got to get a monohull. But these catamarans are, beautifully luxurious, and you can charter one with a captain who is also an ASA instructor, and so you can do your American Sailing Association levels 1, 2, 3 while you're on this lovely Caribbean sailing trip. And get certified, so you can captain these boats yourself. So Laurel and I did that, and so we often in the winters will charter a boat and sail around the Caribbean, and it's a lovely way to spend some of the winter.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Thank you.
That's incredible, Sherif. I'm envious, and I'm going to put that on my list of certifications to be done. That's really amazing. Sherif, the chat tonight has been really insightful and interesting, and I'm feeling pretty humbled here with two giants of academic ophthalmology, both you, Sherif, and Mona. So I want to thank you on behalf of all our listeners for sharing so many of your pearls and insights tonight. I also want to recognize Mona Dagger, who's wrapping up her second season as co-host. She's been wonderful as a co-host. The word that comes to mind is poise and also doer. Mona gets things done, and she's got so much poise, and I've had so much fun co-hosting with her. So on behalf of all our listeners, thank you, Mona. I'm sure we'll have you back in some or many capacities in the coming seasons. But I want to thank you, Mona. So once again, thank you, Sherif, and thank you, Mona, for a wonderful chat.
Thank you, Hadi, for all the great words, and thank you, Sherif, for a wonderful podcast. It was really insightful and enlightening.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
EyeCan wants to know what you think. Please send your comments on today's episode or any suggestions you may have for topics or features to communications@cos-sco.ca, and we will try to incorporate them into future episodes. Season 4 of the EyeCan podcast is brought to you by Bayer Ophthalmology. We thank them for their support.
Nous aimerions remercier Bayer Ophthalmology pour leur support de la 4e saison du balado EyeCan. Thank you from the Canadian Ophthalmological Society.
EyeCan is written and directed by Kim Teitler and produced by John Allaire from Allaire Strategic Works.
EyeCan is available on Apple, Spotify, and Google platforms, and of course, through the COS Practice Resource Center.
Some episodes this season will include relevant links and show notes, so be sure to check episode descriptions to learn more.
Thank you for joining us this week. We look forward to bringing you more episodes.